Hi, I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Richardson, and you are watching AccessTV.org, and the show is For the Greater Good with your host, Evelyn Richardson. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I'm very excited about my special guest. He comes to us from a vast array of experience in the North End of Hartford and also in the city of Hartford. He is a longtime community activist and the past president of Clay Hill Improvement Association. His name is Mr. Charles Barrow. And I would like to say thank you, Charles, for joining us on AccessTV.org on For the Greater Good. So, Mr. Barrow, always I have some questions for my guests, and you know that I love you. I have learned a lot of things from being around you. So the first thing I would like for you to do is share with our viewers who you see yourself as.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I appreciate this opportunity. And you're asking me, who do I what?
See yourself as. See, I just shared who I see you as. But share to our viewers.
I feel as though I'm a good information resource for my long time experience in working in the community. I try to give people the facts before they even realize that I'm telling them the truth. The truth will always set you free. And some people don't want to hear the truth, but I try to give them the truth. As you know, we spent a lot of time together, you and I, with other people, and I've given, you know, little small dips and dabs of things that went on, but at the time that I said those things to people, they didn't really believe it. And then as time went on, and it was probably years gone by, then folks realized that I was telling them
the truth.
The whole truth.
Okay. So now one of the things that you shared with me, and you've been sharing with me for the past year or so, that you are actively in retirement from community service at this point. And I always look at, you know, some of our leaders who are now at the age or the stage in life where they say they've given what they have to give to the community. Now they want to see the younger generations come up and take the torch and to be able to run with that. And the reason why I asked you, the main reason why I invited you to be on For the Greater Good is because it's impossible for you to pass a torch to me and then me to pass a torch to somebody else unless we know a bit about our history, right? I could say today that we are facing this type of situation or issue or even something that turned out very well, and it has a place where it started. So we will find out where it started so that we can find out how we got to where we are. And I think that it's impossible, like I said, for us to be able to do that without connecting to the older generations in our communities to get some of that information. So I thank you for not turning me down, because I know that you kind of shy away these days from, you know, being in a public arena like this, but you are much loved and appreciated for extending this courtesy to me. So first, I want to ask you, Mr. Barrow, if you had a mission statement for your life, who you are, what would that mission statement to the world be about what you represent in the community?
My mission statement would be the great opportunity that I had to be mentored by a lot of very, very serious and reputable people, people that folks don't even know. I mean, these people are unsung heroes. Mm-hmm. Not only my parents, but people I grew up in the neighborhood, and I still keep a relationship with now. Community and public service is not for the faint at heart. You have to be prepared to do this kind of work, because if not, they will eat you up and spit you out. They will eat you from the inside out, and they'll just totally demoralize you. So you have to have what I call the gospel armor to deal with all these things that are coming at you. So my mission is a mission of being very appreciative of the people that I have met and embraced throughout my whole life. And it goes back all the way back to when I was like 2 years old.
Give us some names. Maybe some of our viewers know the mentors that
people
you
like
had in your
Gladys
life.
Fisher, Edgar French, Albert Farmer, Sid Barnett, Gus Isaac, Ola Robinson, Eva Armstrong, Lucille Morris, Richard Henderson, Sidney Barnett, a lot of people, my parents, Harold and Elizabeth Barrow, my grandfather, Walter B. Frederick Sr., who, by the way, was a 33-degree Mason, the highest Mason that you could ever be, and my, my other relatives, and even my peer groups in my, in my family, like my cousin Debbie Barrows, the former chief of police, John Stewart, he's part of our family as well, the former fire chief, people like Eddie Perez, the former mayor of the city of Hartford, Carrie Saxon Perry, grew up with that family.
Wow,
so
the list goes on.
So there's quite a few people that that were actually responsible for my career, my profession, and my interest in volunteerism. Because we actually all started off as volunteers, and once we stuck with it, it blossomed into some positive things for us in terms of our professional lives. So I'm really appreciative of these folk, and I will soon be honoring these folks because a lot of them are like in their 80s and 90s now, and they need to be recognized.
That's a great segue. I agree with you. A great segue to me asking you to share briefly a bit about who Clay Hill Improvement Association, who were the founders, and what was the mission, and how did it start?
All of the people that I just named were part of the Clay Hill Improvement Association. I grew up on Brook Street, and of course our family had a house on Winter Street and Pliny Street. And Clay Hill Improvement Association it was started in 1968 after the civil unrest related to the assassination of Martin Luther King, and then the organization was incorporated in 1970. It was incorporated as being a community development corporation, but the founders, which was Mr. French, Sidney Barnett, Gus Isaac, and those folks that I mentioned, Al Farmer, and them, they all had their own professions, so they didn't run the organization like a community development corporation. They basically ran it as like a little community group. But they were still effective in what they did in the community. We had the largest smoke detector installation program in the city of Hartford. We were the founders of the original chain, Clay Hill and North End, Inc., and of course we are the founders and incorporators of Community Health Services. After the civil unrest, our neighborhood was destroyed by the, riots and things of that nature, and we needed to find a way to get ourselves off our knees in terms of, the reaction from the backlash of the assassination of Martin Luther King. So we just started begin to work. I became a member of Clay Hill Improvement Association in 1977 when I moved back to the neighborhood into my grandparents' old house, and I've been involved since. I served as the youngest president in the 80s, and I continued to be active in the organization up until 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, impressive. So you touched on some of the accomplishments of Clay Hill Improvement Association. Now, if I recall correctly, I remember you sharing about SANS, the school, also being a part of the accomplishments of Clay Hill Improvement Association.
Well, actually, what happened was some of the people, the original founders in the organization, were kind of like parochial. They wanted to just concentrate on Clay Hill and not really include Arsenal, which was a bad thing. But as time went on, we started to embrace the Arsenal neighborhood, and then of course the city named the neighborhood Clay Arsenal. Okay, now there's an interesting dynamic behind that, but I don't think we have a lot of time to be talking about it. But anyway, any large community economic development project that went on in the 06120 zip code, Clay Hill Improvement Association had something to do with it. So to answer your question about SANS School, I'm pretty sure that either some of the founders or some of the supporters had something to do with the Sand, the Sand Everywhere School, as it was called back in the day.
So that's interesting. Now, One Chain, was that a part of Clay? Because this is the first time that I ever heard of Clay Hill being separate from Clay Arsenal.
Yeah, well, what happened was, like I said, some of the founders, they were parochial. They kind of like were territorial. So they didn't want to connect.
Sort of like the NRZ?
Yeah, and that's another subject of its own. But what happened was, okay, Clay Hill and North End Inc., the original chain, okay, its boundaries went up to the Northeast neighborhood. Now what happened is, when Eddie and the original staff, myself, Eddie and the original staff left the original chain, they merged with Organized Northeasterners.
Okay.
And that's when they started calling it One Chain. Okay. Organized Northeasterners and Clay Hill and North End Inc. So that brought in the Northeast neighborhood, which kind of like expanded the boundaries, because the boundaries for Clay Hill and North End went up to Westland Street. But when the Northeast neighborhood got involved, Organized Northeasters got involved, the territory expanded up to Sunset Street, the Wilsontown line.
So the zoning changed?
Well, the city had a lot of little tricks going on, and they kind of like renamed neighborhoods and did different zoning and things of that nature. But that's probably the historic significance of the fact that when most of the original staff left the original chain, they merged with Organized Northeasterners, and then the dynamics of the whole community-based organization changed, and it expanded.
So let's talk about the NRZs, because when you first found me on a church van, faith congregation, who I had just become a member and became a part of the outreach van ministry, and I picked you up, and I had never been involved in this type of community volunteer work, far as being involved with community-based organizations. So to your credit, I am a result of your labor, as you brought me up to speed on some of the dynamics of the Clay Arsenal community. So tell me some about this Clay Hill Improvement Association table, and then how it related to or differed from the NRZ at that time, because when I first came aboard, they were both functioning at the same time.
It's a good question, Evelyn. What the city did was they
and I'm sorry,
they
but we have 2 minutes.
They made the neighborhood revitalization zone committees the organization to go to. It superseded this process, and these committees superseded anything that went on in the neighborhoods. So the city, if you ever want something, they say, well, go to the NRZ. I was on the original executive board of the NRZ, and I never really embraced the fact that there's 14 different strategic plans in the city that's 22 square miles around, and plus you have 4 NRZs in North Hartford, and it should be just one NRZ in North Hartford because of the fact that it's the poorest neighborhood in the country, and people need to get together and do one strategic plan for North Hartford. The NRZ process is, the NRZ, the Neighborhood Revitalization Zone Committee, Hartford 2000 and Hartford 2010 are byproducts of Hartford process. And I will get into that at another time, because that's a story within itself. I think personally it's a counterproductive way to do strategic planning, because why would you have 14 different strategic plans in a city this small? So that's the epitome of separatism to me.
Okay. Well, right here is where we're going to take a break. Thank you, Mr. Barrow, and we'll be right back with you in 1 minute. Thank you for joining us on accesstv.org. Watching For the Greater Good with your host, Evelyn Richardson.
At Hartford Public Schools, we care about one thing above all, the future of our kids. That's why we're dedicated to providing all students with the knowledge and skills needed in the new global culture. Hartford Public Schools is thriving. More student success stories, more world-class facilities, more university and corporate partnerships, more amazing talent coming and staying in Hartford. This is how education is supposed to work. Welcome to Hartford Public Schools, where the future is present.
Thank you, and welcome back to For the Greater Good with Evelyn Richardson and our special guest, Mr. Charles Barrow, past president of Clay Hill Improvement Association. Mr. Barrow, before we went into our break, we were talking about, and I'm calling you Mr. Barrow just because it feels so professional. Charles. I know, Charles. I've been calling you Charles for the last.
I'm just a child saved by grace. You call me Charles. I'm not that. I'm not. That
well, you're very important to me, so
in this universe
you're very important to me. But because we do have a friendship, and I love you.
Well, you're my sister in Christ, so
there you go. So, Charles, you mentioned about the NRZ, and one of my questions that was going to follow that before we took break was, did you view the NRZ legislation as an addition to the work that Clay Hill Improvement Association was doing? Did it add value, or did it somehow hinder the work that was already being done by community-based organizations? You shared a little bit on how you felt about that. Can you elaborate briefly on that?
No, it fragmented the community. Like I said, in a city that's 22 square miles around, it doesn't make any sense to have 14 strategic plans in the city. I mean, like, the city was already racially fragmented in terms of who lived where and things of that nature. When they infused this NRZ concept, that just added to the fragmentation, the separation of the neighborhoods. And my point that I just try to keep getting across is, it does not make any sense for one city to have 14 different strategic plans. And another thing about the NRZs, if you don't have either a 501c3 or you don't have a community development corporation backing you up, there is no way that you could be successful in doing a strategic plan. It's just impossible because it takes money. Okay, now some NRZs do have the support of 501c3s, nonprofits, and they filter their needs through them. Some NRZs have the luxury of having city employees working with them behind the scenes. But my concern is not the rest of the city. My concern is about the North End and why the North End has 4 NRZs as opposed to just one, where they could all 4 neighborhoods could get together and put together a strategic plan and find some resources to help them finance their strategic plan. Now, as you know, I had offered our services from Clay Hill Improvement Association Incorporated that did have a 501c. We don't have it anymore because Clay Hill Improvement Association is basically dormant now. I offered the services of 501c3 to the leadership of the Clay Arsenal NRZ, but they dismissed me out of hand. In fact, they got rid of me. They got rid of my position and just send me off. So, it's just like any other nonprofit effort. You have to have an economic development plan or strategy to deal with the systemic problems that you have in neighborhoods like the North End, blighted housing and crime, gun violence, domestic violence, and all those social ills that keep neighborhoods in abject poverty as the residents of the zip code 06120 are living in. So no, it was not. It was the NRZ process is a deterrent. It was a deterrent.
So, and that's another great segue, because I recall some of the stories. I know as a child, my grandmother used to always say that, back in the day, all the black people lived on Windsor Street. We were right close to the river.
It was called the Bottom.
It was called the Bottom, okay. So I was hoping that you could share with us some of that history, because a lot of our children today, Windsor Street is basically industrial. There's no, place for people to live life back there. But to hear today that years ago that it was a small community within itself. So my question is, at some point blacks were allowed to move into projects. They said that the city hall had came up with a plan because of the blight on Windsor Street to create public housing where they crossed over from the river and the train tracks about a quarter of a mile to the projects, but then they started to build projects around Hartford. I'm more interested in the projects that were created in the north end of Hartford. Would you say that we were fractured or segmented at that time? How was the zoning and districting at that time, and how did it play into, did we have community-based organizations or civic organizations at that time?
Okay, it goes back to the subject of redlining. What the city of Hartford did was they went about to crush the black neighborhood. So they got rid of the bottom. They built Constitution Plaza.
Can I break there for 1 second, and please don't forget where you're going. What does the bottom mean? Did it have a meaning behind it?
It was the bottom of the hill.
Bottom of the hill. Okay, thank you.
Because Clay Hill, that's why they call Clay Hill, because the neighborhoods were built on hills, okay? And so the bottom of the hill, like if you go to Windsor Street, you go up. And so the bottom was the bottom of of the neighborhood. So they call it the bottom. It was a name that was adopted by, the populace there. But City of Hartford went about to crush the black neighborhood. So they got rid of the bottom, they got rid of Windsor Street, built this monstrosity called Constitution Plaza, which changed the dynamics of the whole neighborhood. It even had a ripple effect all the way down Windsor Street. Now, in terms of public housing, which is a big another subject in itself, because that was nothing but the creation of more concentration camps. So what they did was they moved people into the housing developments. I hate to call them projects. I'm a retired housing official from the Hartford Housing Authority, so I know a little history about public housing as well. They moved these folks into the housing developments, created a subculture in a sense, because public housing, when it was originally implemented in the United States of America, was supposed to be transitional. People coming home from the war, they came and had a temporary place to live, and then they moved out. But then the government saw they could make a business out of public housing, transitional welfare and things of that nature. So it became a business for the government. It became a business for the United States government as well as the city of Hartford, because the housing developments was run by Housing and Urban Development and administered by that particular municipality. Okay, so they found that to be a way of life, and then they, they capitalized off of that, and they didn't start de-densifying public housing until, well, when I retired there from. In 2001, they started maybe in 1999, started to, tear all the housing developments down and what have you. But they did that after getting billions of dollars in what they call it, transitional monies or whatever. They made money off of that, and then they decided to disperse those folk and send them out into into the community. So, to answer your question, there's a saying that people are plotting and planning while you're sleeping, and these type of things happen when you're asleep.
While you're sleeping. Okay, so now we've got to the question that I've been waiting to get to. You've been sharing with me over the past year about an article that's written by a Trinity College professor.
It's called On the Line. How schooling, housing, and civil rights shaped Hartford and its suburbs, by Professor Jack Dougherty and his colleagues from Trinity College. That pretty much talks about what we've been talking about here today. It just pretty much validates everything that we've been talking about, how the city of Hartford redlined the north end. The red line started at Trumbull in Maine, about 500 feet from Trumbull in Maine, going west is the gateway to North Hartford, which is Albany and Main Street. And so, a lot of people know about the redlining and where it started and all that. You remember, I guess they knocked down Butt building or something like that. I think it was the old HB Davis building. They just recently demolished that. That was where, the red line was, where they told people who didn't live in that neighborhood, do not cross this red line because those people up there are dangerous. And that's when they started to divest and isolate and things of that nature. And I'm hoping to do a film documentary of this report that Professor Jack Dowd and his colleagues did, so people could see visually, how the city of Hartford created the poorest neighborhood in the country.
Okay, so Charles, so you've been at this thing for years. You've volunteered, you've been a blessing to people like myself and many other people by exposing them to the knowledge about the communities that they live in and giving them that extra push to get involved in civic work and community work. So my question is, if you had the mantle right now in your hand, in your possession, to be able to pass the torch to one of our younger viewers, even who, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody, younger or very much younger, but what would be your advice? And I'm going to ask you to speak to our viewing audience as you pass the torch to the next person or generation. What would be the advice that you give them going out into the city of Hartford to do this kind of work?
My advice would be to get good advice from people who can give good advice. Like I had mentioned, community service and public service is not for the weak at heart. You got to have that gospel armor on, and you have to know what you're doing. You have to be a creature of study. You have to know the difference between the right, the wrong, and the truth. And you have to have a vision before you step on the pavement and go anywhere. Because in cities like Hartford, and Hartford has a very interesting culture, I'll just put it that way. I could go a little deeper than that, but I won't, because it would just be too negative. Okay. But you just have to be able to know when you walk into a landmine and diverting yourself from that. You have to surround you have to be surrounded by good faith-based people. I found that some of the reasons why we weren't successful because we didn't have God into the scenario, which is always very, very important. That's why, as you know, all of our meetings either started with a moment of quiet reflection or prayer. All this nonsense about taking prayer out of school and all that, you can't go by that. That's political. But you have to have a spiritual feeling about what you're doing before you step out there on faith. So my advice would be to talk to people who you trust, who's going to tell you the real deal, the truth. Stay, within your parameters. Don't go outside the box where you might get yourself trapped up. Like I did. After 35 years of service, people turned on me, ran me out of town, made me a pariah, only because I was telling them the truth, and they didn't want to really hear the truth. So my advice to people would be, young people or older people or people who want to get involved, is, go with it, with faith, go with it with knowledge, not only book knowledge, but wisdom from people who have been there and know really what's the dynamics of what's going on. And of course, they need to read the parable of the water tank.
Okay. Anybody Tell us about that parable.
The parable of the water tank is, it explains how the economic system works in the nation, international, universal, whatever. It basically tells you that the whole system has been bought and paid for by the super rich.
Okay. That's where I want to ask you a question.
So the 97% of us, the parable of the water tank is the 97% of us take care of the 3% of the richest people in the universe.
Okay. That's basically I want to know about the people in Hartford or maybe the surrounding towns. Who would you say, in your estimation, is actually running the city of Hartford? Because I hear stories that City Hall is actually not running the city of Hartford.
That's a question that I cannot answer. You can't even ask the President of the United States who's running the system.
And he wouldn't be able to tell you.
He wouldn't be able to tell you either. So A little guy like me could not give you the answer to that. They say it's the Chamber of Commerce. They say it's other, but you can never tell. You never know. We don't know who the puppeteer is.
Master is.
We don't know who the puppet master is. We don't know who the puppeteer is. So I can't intelligently say who's running the show, but whoever's running the show, they're benefiting. They're reaping the benefits from our existence. Exactly. I'll just put it to you that way.
Okay. Thank you, Charles, for joining us on For the Greater Good. Thank you for joining us out there in internet land. And we hope you join us next week where we will have another special guest. For the next month, we will be bringing in people that have the history in their belly so that they can show us how we got to where we are today. Have a blessed day.